Welcome to another episode of Conduct Judgmental. I am Dan Lush, joined this week by Tarun Sharma. Welcome back, Tarun.
I missed you, Dan, almost as much as I missed the podcast.
Well, we missed you. You've had a hiatus because you were studying for the bar. Then you went on a little bit of vacation, and I think you moved. And then, people were like, "Where's the newsletter? What happened to Tarun?" I'm like, "He's fine. He's just taking a little bit of a break from everything, but he is okay." So, Tarun, we'd love to have you back. We got a couple baseball stories this week. We're going to be joined later in the episode by Matt Tympanick, our resident DA, to talk about some criminal law issues that have been popping up. Henry Ruggs, Britt Reid, and Montrezl Harrell. Before we get into our substance, a reminder, the podcast is sponsored by Themis Bar Review, top bar prep company in the entire galaxy. Tarun, pop quiz. Who'd you use for your bar prep?
I used Themis.
Oh, how'd they prepare you for the bar?
Hopefully well.
Did you feel pretty good?
I don't think anybody ever feels good about that exam.
See, I think if you feel good, that means that you just weren't challenged enough by the questions. Like, I think the people that feel good, oh, it felt good, they definitely passed. But there are like a sneaky high amount of people that just didn't spot all the issues that they felt that good, right?
I felt very challenged by the exam.
That's good. You want to feel challenged. I think that's the point that Themis does. And, I'm not going to knock any other bar prep companies, but I think the point of Themis' studying is to make you feel as if this is a harder test than it actually is. And then you get to the exam, right? You've been through hard tests, you've been through the grinder, but you can come out on the other side. Tarun, what do you find out before I got to keep my tabs on you?
October. Beginning of October.
Okay, so as we sit here, we just had a long Labor Day weekend. Tarun, you do anything? We haven't had a podcast about a week or so. You do anything fun the past week?
Yeah, college football kicked off. The Gophers played on Thursday. They had their former coach, Jerry Kill, came into town with New Mexico State. 36.5-point line. They managed to cover. They won 38-0, pitched a shutout. The offense looked much better than it did last year. So they have their old offensive coordinator back from their magical 2019 season. So I'm hoping that they'll be a legitimate threat in the Big Ten West this year.
It's very kind of you not to ask me about Nebraska, who barely beat North Dakota. I don't know what's going on, and I'm at this point, I'm a little scared to even tweet about Nebraska because there are people in my replies. I'm like, it can't get worse from here, Nebraska. I'm excited for game number 2, and then someone in my replies is like, at Old Takes Exposed, and I'm like, great, I'm going to get Old Takes Exposed because they didn't cover. Barely beat North Dakota.
I've always wanted to go to Memorial Stadium in Lincoln. It's on my list. And the Gophers play there, I think, at the beginning of November. And so I'm going to take a weekend trip over there and watch a game.
Interesting. I might be going to Nebraska this year, but I cannot give you further details. I might be. Tarun, I didn't mention this on the podcast. I didn't do my victory lap last week. I meant to. Okay. I was on the podcast. I went on Twitter. I went on Instagram. I went on every form of social media. And I said, here's the most obvious bet that I can tell you guys. So, sports law, sports betting, there is somewhat of a marriage, right? We do follow these legal cases. We can tell you, right, as we're going to talk about with Matt Tympanick, we can have some indication, right, that Montrezl Harrell was more likely to play in the NBA again than was a Henry Ruggs. Maybe that's not news breaking. The one where we beat the books now twice is on Novak Djokovic. So we said a couple months ago, we're like, he's not going to play in the Australian Open. We've looked at Australian law. We've looked at Australia's history of handling with these unvaccinated test cases. They're not going to let him play. And they're going to make an example of him. So we were right. The books had Novak as the favorite. And if you bet on anybody else that was not named Novak before he was kicked out of the country, you get some nice odds boosted. Tarun, I was on the podcast a couple weeks ago. I said the same thing. I go, Novak Djokovic is the favorite to win the U.S. Open. He is not currently allowed in the United States of America. So unless they want to make an exception for Novak, right? And this is not a political podcast. We're not talking about, whether someone can, has a right to be non-vaccinated or not. I'm just like, that's Novak's standpoint. He's certainly not going to change it after he didn't for the Australian Open. The Australian Open didn't make any exceptions for him. The U.S. Open, certainly not. So I don't think he's going to play. So if you bet on anybody not named Novak, I think you're going to get some really nice odds that are going to move once Novak's kicked out. So that has happened. Now, Tarun, the problem was I said, doesn't matter who you bet on, just don't bet on Novak. And I intentionally did not give a pick. I myself bet on Rafa Nadal, which, I got him at 10-1. So I got my odds in good. He dropped. Think about 7-1, 6-1, right in that range. He was upset. So it is what it is. Tarun,
he was upset by my guy, Francis Tiafoe. Well, he's a DC area guy. He's from Maryland. He's from Hyattsville.
Isn't there a crazy story about him that his dad was the custodian?
Yeah. Yeah, so at the JTCC, which is one of the best tennis academies in the entire country, which is in Maryland, his father, who is both his parents are immigrants from Sierra Leone. His father worked as the custodian, never played any tennis, but he started as like a seasonal worker and then did so well that they brought him on full time. His father actually lived at the complex in a small like side room, and was able to then get his twin sons, Francis and his brother, into the tennis camps for free. And so from a young age, Francis Tiafoe was thought of to be one of the next great American tennis players. He won the Orange Bowl at age 15 or 16, I think. So people who have been following American tennis players for a while, we've been waiting for Tiafoe to have a win this big. And so tonight he's going to be going for an opportunity to break into the semifinals. So it's very exciting and very cool to have a young American in this position. This is the first time since Roddick that we have an American man this young at this spot.
So speaking of tennis, and then I had the great pleasure of seeing Serena on Wednesday night. Rachel, my wife, and I bought tickets. It was pretty crazy. Like the morning before they announced that Serena was going to retire, we just got really lucky. I don't have any inside information. I'm like, should go to the Open. We have 2 young kids. We have not been to a sporting event together since the COVID started, like almost 2 years. I've been to some, just not with Rachel. And then, like, as luck would have it, Serena announced her retirement, and the seats that we bought went up like 5x, 6x. It was like crazy. Like Tyson was in the crowd. Who was in the crowd? Russell Wilson was in the crowd. Mike Tyson was there. Gladys Knight. It was like who's who. So my people were like, wow, Mr. Moneybags, you guys got those crazy tickets. I'm like, no. She got very lucky. So yes, did that. And then over this past Labor Day weekend, my daughter, she's in the pool, she's swimming, she's having a good time. So, and she just started her first 3-year-old class today. So daddy dropped her off at school. So I don't know, it's been a busy week and change. But with that said, a little bit of a long opening, but we are human beings here. Sometimes we just jump right to the news. Other times we have some fun things that happen in life, which are important to share. Okay, so Tarun, the breaking news today, story that we have been at the forefront of, and friend of the show, Darren Heitner, unbeknownst to me, was really in the heart of this. Darren Heitner was representing Doug Gottlieb. Doug Gottlieb was sued by agent Casey Close for a tweet that he sent out. And the tweet basically said that Casey Close, the agent of Freddie Freeman, did not relay the last offer made by the Braves to keep him. So, it was kind of a loaded allegation. Casey Close came out and said, that is not true, and we were going to explore all legal options. So then Casey Close turned around and sued Doug Gottlieb, and Darren Heitner was on the defense representing Gottlieb, and essentially said, this was a lie. I am a private figure, which, we went back and forth on if it was public or private. But he essentially said, whatever way you want to spin it, this statement was not true, and I'm suing you for damages. So today we have a statement issued by Doug Gottlieb, quote, I prematurely reported on these events and simply got it wrong. The statement goes on to essentially say that he relied on a source who, was incorrect. And then Casey Close issued a statement that they consider the matter closed. Now, as of today, or as of right now, there's been no stipulation of discontinuance that has been filed, which is the formal legal document to close the case. But it seems to be at the end of a legal saga. No reporting on the amount of money that was resolved to settle the case, if there was any money. But Tarun, I'll turn it to you. I think Retraction still, I don't know, my gut is that more people saw the first tweet than going to read the Retraction tweet. That's usually how it goes.
Yeah, I was wondering, because what we were talking about at the initial outset was what kind of effect is this going to have on Casey Close's business? Because he is the top agent at Excel Sports Management, which is a very large agency. And we were speculating whether other players were going to distance themselves from Casey Close as a result of Freddie Freeman firing him and then these allegations coming out. I was going to ask you, how typical is it that, we don't know about any monetary figure, but how typical is it for an apology to suffice in a defamation case?
Well, it's actually a great question, because I actually, my DMs, sometimes people are they don't want to comment, they don't want to ask it, but the people in my DMs are asking, do you think there was money involved? I will say that the statement, and I imagine our friend of the show, Darren Heitner, had a lot to do with the statement. I'm not sure who drafted it, if it was Casey Close's side or Freddie Freeman's side, but I'm just going to read part of this, right? it says, I have learned that the conduct I alleged did not occur and that there is no credible basis for stating that it did. My investigation into this matter confirms that Casey Close did, in fact, communicate all offers to Freddie Freeman, and the sources I relied on were incorrect in no uncertain terms. So why I wanted to read that. That statement is like the gold standard of all retractions. It's a complete retraction. It says that I looked into it and it was wrong. Whatever I said was wrong. I apologize. It wasn't true, blah, blah, blah. It's very different than the settlements that were reached in the Deshaun Watson case, which were terms were not disclosed. We don't know anything. NDAs on both sides, and we're not going to know anything. And no one's admitting fault or guilt or anything, but we're paying an amount of money, which, whatever. We don't know if money was paid in the Watson case, but we don't really know the terms of the settlement. This statement is the gold standard of statements. So certainly there is a world, and Darren's not going to tell me, I don't think he's allowed to one way or the other, but this is a statement that I think, because it's so unequivocal, there's a world where Casey Close would accept this statement in lieu of maybe like a lesser statement that didn't admit guilt, but maybe offered some form of payment. We talked about this on a previous show, and I was just kind of hyperbolizing. Doug Gottlieb, certainly imagine he's pretty, well off with his career in sports media, but he doesn't have the pockets that a Fox Sports would have. I don't think Fox Sports I don't know if they had any culpability here. Obviously, full disclosure, I go on Fox Sports all the time to talk about various issues. I don't know one way or the other if Fox Sports paid any bit of the legal fees or was involved in the settlement in any way, shape, or form. But I'm not sure Doug Gottlieb had the amount of money at his disposal to pay what would be a massive, settlement demand. But this case was settled fairly quickly. So it tells me that what Casey Close really wanted was his reputation to be protected. And this statement, is like literally the gold standard. Essentially, Gottlieb was saying, like, I looked into it myself and I'm wrong. My bad. It's a backtrack of all backtracks. So I don't know one way or the other, but it would not shock me if there was no money involved here. It would not.
Yeah, like you said, more than just an admission of being incorrect, it is that it is Doug Gottlieb saying that Casey Close's version of events is correct. So it's like even more than just apologizing, like you said. I want to point out something interesting, though. This may be a little bit unrelated. I'm looking at the article on ESPN. The first line is, a radio host has admitted he falsely claimed agent Casey Close never informed first baseman Freddie Freeman of the Atlanta Braves' last contract offer. Didn't Gottlieb work for ESPN for like a decade? It's like a weird way to phrase something like that, right? Wouldn't they normally say like former ESPN or current Fox Sports talking head or whatever? It's just, I was very struck by how odd that is. You make anything of that?
Well, they got to be delicate, and just in the same way that, again, full disclosure, I go on Fox Sports, so I can't go on here and, jump up and down and say that, Fox mishandled this. I have no idea what anyone's involvement was. So I think ESPN has to treat with kid gloves, right? I saw Passan's tweet on this, was pretty kind of vanilla. I'm seeing some other people being very harsh on the fact that Gottlieb was kind of got off, at least in some eyes, pretty easy from this. But, the way that you read that headline, at least the way they're phrasing it is that Gottlieb is essentially admitted to making the thing up, which that's not really how I read the statement. I read that he conducted further investigation afterwards and determined it was worth retracting. So maybe there's some reading into it that somebody painted it in a different manner, but Gottlieb is a former ESPN host. So maybe they just didn't want to bring attention to the fact that he used to work at ESPN. That's at least some reading of it. But yeah, in terms of reputational harm, it's there. We had this interesting debate whether Close was a public figure or private figure. I know Darren has tweeted this, that he thought he could make an argument that Casey Close was a public figure since the lawsuit came. Casey Close was featured very prominently in the Derek Jeter documentary. Not saying that makes him automatically a public figure, but in this day and age in 2022, there are probably more public figures than we've ever had them before, just with the versions of social media and whatnot. I think interestingly, Casey Close issues his statement today through Excel Sports Management. So he's kind of hiding behind his agency and saying, like, I'm not the person that's issuing the statement. It's the agency. So again, there was this debate about whether Casey Close issuing the statements and appearing publicly with those type of statements, that would have thrust him into the public spotlight. But we don't have that debate. It's now all academic. And from a reputational standpoint, we'll see. I know Josh Kusnick, friend of the show, he was on with us talking about this. He was pretty adamant that he thought the sources from Doug Gottlieb were members of the Atlanta Braves organization. So, that was his theory. I'm not sure if that was proven or disproven, but someone usually has an agenda when they leak the story. Gottlieb is, interestingly, in that statement, he's saying that he had sources. So there's an S at the end. There was some talk on the Twitter sphere, like maybe Gottlieb one sourced it, which was a fancy term that I had never heard of before until I looked at Twitter and saw some people in the replies. But if you had one source of one person told you this and you ran with it, maybe that's closer to reckless reporting, right? And maybe some form of defamation or libel, as was alleged here. But he's saying sources. There's an S there. So he was allowed to write that. So again, I think ESPN might be taking some a little bit of liberties. I didn't read the statement the same way they reported it. At least that's my reading.
Yeah, Excel Sports Management says that they consider the matter closed, and I think we can as well.
Yeah. So with that said, let's turn to the last baseball topic. We didn't have you on the podcast last week. We had Wallach on and we had Bill Shaken from the LA Times to kind of explain what's going on with the minor league baseball unionization saga. So Tarun, you used to work in Major League Baseball. You used to work Tarun Diamondbacks and Giants. So I have those two, right?
Mm-hmm.
I used to work for a baseball agency, SFX Baseball, now known as Relativity. Did some work on the team side. So, working with players, working against players, depending on what side you're on, it's certainly an important topic. And we've had some updates on the minor league front. So, Tarun, fill everybody in. The last time we were on the show, we just announced that there were going to be efforts made to unionize minor leaguers. So, kind of explain to people where we've gone in the last 10 days.
Yeah, and I think you guys covered that the process is essentially that 30% of minor leaguers had to return these signed union authorization cards. And what that does is not automatically trigger the formation of a union or anything like that. What it does is make it so that there would be a vote on whether to authorize the union or not. So in the conversations that I've had, there was some feeling that this union effort would want to reach something like 80 or 90%. So this is in 10 days, they've achieved more than 50%. So they're off to a good start. And what they've done now is made a request for voluntary recognition. So yesterday they asked Major League Baseball Commissioner Manfred, this is in a letter to Deputy Commissioner Dan Halem, and asked for Major League Baseball to voluntarily recognize this minor league players union. And so what that is asking is that MLB come to the table and just simply negotiate with the union directly rather than having to have a vote. And the vote would require that over 50% of all the voting members, whoever has submitted these union authorization cards, approve the adoption of the union and the formation of the union as a bargaining unit. But MLBPA is basically asking for that to be sidestepped. What do you think, Dan? You think that that we can expect Major League Baseball to just voluntarily recognize the union?
Do we expect it? No. Could happen, I guess. Major League Baseball has fought this minor league issue for years upon years and years, despite litigation, right? I think we mentioned it briefly in the last show, but we've had Garrett Brocious on the podcast before, started a lawsuit to basically recognize minor leaguers as being entitled to additional wages, whether that was minimum wage or whatnot. But it's in the amount of money Major League Baseball paid out, $185 million to settle that case. I don't know. Baseball could have done this a long time ago. They could have paid minor leaguers more money. Go ahead, Terry.
But we should really recognize what advocates for minor leaguers, what that's Brocious's group has done in this entire process. They really made it so that it became a hot button issue. They were very effective in the way that they were communicating the messaging.
Can I say one thing on that? When Garrett was on the podcast about a year ago, he mentioned to me offline, if you have any students that want to join, the minor league baseball advocates, please feel free to reach out. So, it's a pipeline. Sometimes we have guests on the show. I think our listeners can rest assured if we have a guest on the show, we probably have some type of relationship with them. And, maybe the underreported part of that story is the minor league baseball advocates group, I think, is being now dissolved with several of their leaders being absorbed into the Major League Baseball Players Association. So there's going to be a real fight. So would Major League Baseball be smart to, voluntarily recognize the union? I don't know. I guess reasonable minds could differ here. baseball for years, right, has had an antitrust exemption. They've had favorable lobbyists on their side for years and years and years. To recognize minor leaguers as having a union, I mean, that's a giant piece of the financial pie that would have to be divided differently. Right now, as crazy as this sounds, Major League Baseball owners and teams can pay minor leaguers whatever they want because they're not forced to pay the minimum wage. Even a guy like, and I heard, I saw some of Manfred's comments that maybe it wasn't necessarily fair to view all minor leaguers as being underpaid because most of them, not want to say most of them, but a large percentage will get paid these heavy signing bonuses up front.
He might have said that, but that is inaccurate. Like there are a few bonus babies on every team. Maybe you might have like maybe 15 of these guys in the system because it's only the guys that are taken at the top half of the draft pretty much. And there might be some guys later on that are paid above the slot in order to get them to sign. But like the idea that there were all these bonus babies who have received $1 million in a signing bonus is just factually inaccurate.
Right. I mean, the point being that I think Major League Baseball understands there's a battle on their hands and they have to treat this very delicately. What they've done, and the other lawsuit that, you and I didn't discuss, we discussed in the last show, was that, Jim Quid, who's been on with us a couple of times, is suing Major League Baseball for the retraction of several teams, because that would impacted certain minor leaguers. And obviously, if there's less minor league teams, there's less minor leaguers to go around. So baseball is readying, I think, right, for something like this to happen, right? That minor leaguers might get paid more money. So,
they've also shortened the draft. They cut the draft in half.
Right. I mean, we'll see. I mean, to answer your initial question, I don't know what Major League Baseball is going to do. I do know that there's been a lot of movement on this minor league front. Tarun, you mentioned one thing, that the minor league baseball advocates, they've been very effective at tweeting out certain pictures, right? It's another thing about applying pressure. They were tweeting out like Fire Festival-esque grilled cheese sandwiches that players were getting on the road. So they've done a really good job at getting the messaging out there. And I know, like, when I retweet those type of stories, it's a similar level of support than, the United States women's national team received. Like both entities, and obviously there are different groups behind them, they've done a really good job at getting like 100% public support behind these movements. So people want to help minor leaguers, people want to help women's soccer. And now it's just a matter of what will happen, right? I just tweeted out last night that, the women's soccer team signed officially their new collective bargaining agreement. There's certainly a world where minor leaguers are on that trajectory as well.
On the field after playing Nigeria, which is pretty cool.
I saw that. Yeah. I mean, listen, whoever's in charge of their marketing side does a great job. And same with the minor leaguers. And again, not to make light of it, but minor league baseball, their group, right, minor league baseball advocates, is now being absorbed by the Major League Baseball Players Association. So I don't know, take a guess of what one of their priorities is going to be. It's certainly something to watch as we move forward. And that's going to be one of our biggest stories for 2022, I'm sure.
With this process, say they vote for the Major League Baseball Players Association to represent minor leaguers. This is guys that are not on the 40-man. Are they their own individual bargaining unit? Will they have their own CBA, or will they be part of the next Major League Baseball CBA?
It's a good question. And I've always felt it odd that current major leaguers can, in some way, shape, or form, impact the rights of, soon to be major league. It's not even like people that will be drafted in the future. Like NFL has this issue where like they can control the rookie wage scale of guys that are in college that are not necessarily pros. They're still in college. Minor league baseball is a little bit different because these guys are pros, but you and I both know how baseball works. Sometimes it takes seasoning of 2, 3, 4 years in the minors before you make your way up. So we'll see. I think their minor leaguers and major leaguers are more similarly situated than college players and, NFL pros, but we'll see. I'm sure they could go any number of routes. My gut is that they're going to be two separate labor forces, but the fact that at the end of the day that these two groups are combining in the MLBPA, maybe that's as much of an indication as we need that they're going to try to negotiate, all together. So I think it's anyone's guess at the present time, but certainly movement and momentum is on minor leaguer side. Tarun, what's the number? Was it just over 50% of cards were returned, or do we have some more specific number than that today?
Yeah, it said just over 50% in 10 days, but like you said, I think this is something to follow not only this year, but we've got 5 years left on this current CBA. And it was a very contentious process to even achieve this deal. We had the lockout by the owners and the delayed start to the baseball season. So I'm not sure what's going to happen. That was the first labor stoppage in a generation. I would hope that Commissioner Manfred would do everything that he could to avoid that going forward.
So as we close out this topic, I just want to make one note, and it's something I've said on the show before, but I know we have new listeners that maybe need to hear this. I get this question a lot whenever I speak to law students. What classes should I take? And you can tell you, hey, labor law is pretty good, IP law is pretty good, antitrust law. There's always some versions of that are going to impact sports. But of those, you can take advanced contract drafting, whatever, right? There's obvious ones. But I think of all of those, I could group them all together, but I think above and beyond, labor and employment law is by far the most transferable skill to work in professional sports, right? You could work on the league side, right? Dealing with the Players Association. You could deal on the union side. I have friends at Major League Baseball on the Major League, on the league side and the player side. And then on top of it, if you want to work as an agent, there's no better field to know than labor and employment law, how to kind of exploit the collective bargaining agreement to make money on behalf of your client. So yeah, I mean, if you're trying to pick a field to go into that is transferable to sports, and let's say you don't get that sports job right out of school, and you need to work as a traditional lawyer, I think finding a job in labor and employment is the best. And I've not told this story on the podcast. I'll save it. We'll make him come on at some point. But we have a good friend of the show who was working as a plaintiff's employment lawyer, was obsessed with baseball in all shapes and sizes, started writing about sports law, very similar to how our writers do on our website. Basically, it got an interview with a Major League Baseball legal department because of those writing samples. And I say writing samples, he was literally writing articles about arbitration and whatever we have on conductdetrimental.com. And he got a job. So now he's an associate general counsel for a professional baseball team. Why? Because he was, 2-3 years out of law school, working at a normal plaintiff's employment firm. And he knew a lot about baseball law. And, his tweets and his social media were certainly indicative of that. So if you had this question in the back of your head, what field of law should I get into? What class should I definitely take before the time I graduate? Labor and employment law. That is my answer. There's not really a close second. Let's end the baseball talk here. And I did mention this, Matt Tympanick, our resident DA, is going to join us. We have 3 really big stories in the criminal landscape that we wanted to cover. Henry Ruggs, I just did a hit for Court TV on this. He was supposed to have a preliminary hearing today for his really kind of fiery DUI crash and driving 156 miles per hour, a really kind of heinous incident. We'll cover the updates on that case, the Britt Reid case. That's the son of Andy Reid, who has his own DUI, and Montrezl Harrell, who former 6th man of the year, played with the Lakers, the Hornets, the Clippers, the Rockets, and now is signing with the Philadelphia 76ers because he got his charges way knocked down. So Matt's going to explain kind of developments in the criminal side. So without further ado, let us kick it over to Matt Tympanick. Matt Tympanick, our resident DA, you are back, and we have no shortage of sports law topics for you today. Well, what do we want to cover first? We want to cover Ruggs, Britt Reid, Montrezl Harrell. Up to you.
Let's do Ruggs first.
Okay, so I mean, it's been a minute since we've covered the Henry Ruggs case. For those that have not followed as closely as we have, November of 2021 is when this incident occurs. A fiery crash, really heinous incident. 156 miles per hour. Henry Ruggs was reported as driving 100, I think it was 127 at impact. A crash that results in the death of Tina Tintor and her dog, a golden retriever. Really kind of, just tragic incident. And strangely though, and Matt, maybe you can speak to this, we've gone basically a year without a preliminary hearing, which I know is not normal. I know there's been a fight about whether the blood tests were going to be admissible or not, but I don't know, to get to a preliminary hearing, and seems to be a pretty low bar. Matt, is that normal to go, almost a full year without having a preliminary hearing in a high profile case like this?
Usually it's not that normal, but the thinking being is the defense first wanted to see if they could keep out the blood test, because if they kept out the blood test, it gives them a much stronger leveraging position in a potential plea or this preliminary hearing. A preliminary hearing is whether or not is held in front of the judge, where the judge determines whether or not there's enough evidence to move forward to trial. Based on what we've read, the admission of the blood alcohol test, as well as the driving pattern, the witness statements, the victim statement, there is enough to get to a preliminary hearing right now and move the case forward to trial.
Yeah, I mean, let's talk. I mean, Henry Ruggs, if you're coming new to this, maybe you don't know who Ruggs is. I mean, a really high profile 2020 first round pick of the Raiders, 12th overall pick. We've spent a lot of time on this podcast talking about Deshaun Watson, how he had his own allegations, but he's getting, I don't want to say a second chance, but he's playing in the NFL. Henry Ruggs was cut from the Raiders, very quickly. The guy that seemingly was going to be the face of the franchise for many years was cut very quickly. So, this podcast, Matt, is called Conduct Detrimental. What do we have here? We have a DUI, right? We have DUI charges. We have a gun charge, a misdemeanor gun charge. There was a gun found in his car. And obviously, at the end of the day, someone lost their life. So we can talk about, whether the optics, whether he can play in the NFL again. But I think where this, the story of Henry Ruggs starts is that these are serious felony charges, and there's a misdemeanor included in there, but he faces a maximum of 50 years in prison. So I don't know, the optics, seem to say the DA's office is going to want to proceed with this very quickly. The NFL doesn't have his back anymore. The Raiders don't have his back anymore because they cut bait with him. So this is a case that I think has been now postponed 4 or 5 times for a preliminary hearing. You and I were set to speak about it today. There was this big preliminary hearing scheduled for today. And now that's postponed again until October 12th. So, Matt, my understanding is that the state was the one that requested to delay this hearing this time. You, as a former DA, do you have any insight as to why the state, after almost a year, is now choosing to push this again?
I think they want to get more and more evidence. I think based on what I've already read, they have enough to get over a preliminary hearing. But the risk in that is if they feel that they might come up short. Usually in preliminary hearings, in some states are called probable cause hearings, if the judge finds that there isn't enough evidence to move forward, the case is dismissed in its entirety with prejudice, meaning that the charges cannot be brought again. This is an exceptionally high-profile case. Like you said, Henry Ruggs used to play for the Raiders. He obviously has an army of attorneys. And this is a case that is very likely a trial case unless there is a deal cut. Because why? He faces under Nevada law at a minimum of 2 years in prison. And I think I was on Twitter yesterday, and there's a difference between jail and prison. And we'll get into that more when we discuss Britt Reid later. But he faces a maximum of 15, but a minimum of 2. So the thinking being is that he could be looking at close to a decade in prison. And based on the fact that he was going roughly 157 miles an hour and 128 miles an hour at impact, those are exceptionally aggravating factors. And there are going to be a lot of eyeballs on this case because of who he is, because of the role he did, and the sheer aggravating circumstances of this crime.
Yeah. I guess we can let's get into the weeds a little bit, Matt, because I know, you as a former DA, right? The argument, the only thing we really heard, I want to say concretely from the defense side is that they want to challenge the blood alcohol test, right? And the blood alcohol test showed, I think, that Ruggs was 2 times the legal limit. I think it was a test that was taken at the hospital. So he refused sobriety tests. There were reports in the police report that he was slurring his words at the scene. But as you and I have discussed on a previous podcast, you're involved in a 156 mile per hour crash, 127, whatever you want to call it, and a crash in excess of 100 miles an hour, which no one is disputing that there was an impact. You and I have talked about whether they're going to contest whether Ruggs was the driver or the girlfriend was the driver. But in any event, if he's an occupant of the car and he gets into the crash and he's slurring his words at the scene, maybe, right, that was caused by a traumatic head injury. That's certainly possible. There are reports that have come out that at the hospital afterwards, that Ruggs was ripping out IVs and he was being very difficult with the nurses. So, at the end of the day, right, I think you mentioned it. You don't necessarily need the blood test to show, right, to have a preliminary hearing to show that someone might have been under the influence. Let's remind everyone, right? This is like a 3:30 a.m. crash. It's someone driving 127 miles an hour. You can look at, I remember those Instagram pictures or whatever it was, Snapchat pictures that came out, that Ruggs was at a Topgolf facility that looks like there was alcohol in the background on some of these pictures. So I don't know, put 2 and 2 together. You don't really need, right, the blood alcohol by itself to get in, Matt. But do you think that, I mean, let's say for some reason the blood alcohol was thrown out. Do you think there's enough here to get past and to make sure like you get past this preliminary hearing and move on? My gut seems that there's enough here, but you're the DA here, so you tell me.
Yeah, I think there is enough to get over a preliminary hearing. But also what you're looking at, the DA is also looking at, all right, what is from the time we have this hearing to trial? If we don't have the blood test, the defense is going to try to exploit every single loophole or try to leverage that into a plea. They know their client is dead to right. they talked about, all right, try to argue that the impact, it wasn't actually the impact that killed her, the alleged victim, is the fact that he hit the car and then the car caught on fire and she died from that. That's not going to play with a jury. A jury's not going to be like, well, you got a point there. No, they're going to be like, you're going 100, you hit her at 128 miles an hour. Her car exploded because you hit it. Their best play is to try to say, oh, I wasn't driving, the victim was driving. But at the same time, I've had DUI manslaughter cases where they pulled the vehicle after impact and were able to extract DNA off the driver's, off the steering wheel and off the dashboard, where I had a case where my defendant was claiming he was the passenger, he wasn't the driver, but his DNA was on the steering wheel and the alleged victim was on the passenger side on the dashboard. And there's no way possible. We had evidence that it couldn't have been transferred or stuff like that, in addition to the wallet and shoes of the defendant being in the driver's side as well.
Yeah, I mean, and assuming they try that defense, you'd imagine, right, that Ruggs' girlfriend who was in the car is going to be on board at that, because if she says no, right, that's a very different story. And I think the car was his. So you and I spoke about it on a previous show, but could there be a world where a girlfriend is driving the boyfriend's car, or the wife is driving the husband's car? Sure, right? Because my wife drives my car, I drive her car. Sometimes it just depends on the situation. But you'd imagine the girlfriend would be on board with that. So we'll see. It's a different type of case than the Watson stuff, because I remember saying, like, why would Watson's camp? Watson's camp is trying to push this thing out. They're trying to push the trials and adjourn them as far as they can to work on a settlement. And that's what we had essentially, right? These cases were pushed all the way out until 2023, and then all of them settled into, with the exception of one. This is a case where Ruggs is not a member of an NFL team. There is no team that's willing to touch him while this is floating out there. So I don't know. Ruggs' attorneys have no reason to continue to push this, right? I don't think any team is going to touch him. But then again, right? We've been here now for 10 months. And there has really been no traction at all in the case. He's been released on bail. I think it was $150,000. I think he's training. He's trying to stay in shape, but it's wishful thinking. I'm not sure what team would take a chance on him. We can't necessarily talk about the Henry Ruggs case without talking about the Dante Stallworth case from several years ago. It's another NFL wide receiver who was involved in an accident that resulted in the death of another person. The Ruggs case is alleged to be in a rear end accident. So if you're trying to figure out civil law, who's at fault, if you rear end someone, you're usually at fault. You can have a summary judgment if there is a civil case that results in this, but a summary judgment, just like, hey, you hit me in the back and you don't have a non-negligent excuse for hitting, in the back of the car. The Dante Stallworth case, Dante Stallworth was a guy who ended up playing the NFL again. But I think the allegation was this pedestrian kind of jumped out in the middle of the crosswalk. And although Dante Stallworth was, found to have been under the influence, there was some culpability on the victim's part here. So, I don't know, man. I give people this long range of stuff. I know that people are asking the questions on Twitter. Will Ruggs play again? My gut is no, but we'll see. He's got a case here, innocent until proven guilty, and he's hired some high profile lawyers in the space. So, we'll see what they can come up with.
And definitely with this case, why they want to continue this out. When you're a criminal defense attorney, if the prosecution has got you cold, you don't want to go to trial right away. You want the case years to go by. You want the evidence to fall apart, the victim and witnesses to not have the greatest memory or not care if it were. That's the situation where you'd allow it to continue. You would want it to go to trial as quickly as possible if you think that the prosecution can't put their case together. Because if they can't, you don't want to give them time to be able to do it. You don't want to give them time to be able to find out if his DNA is on the steering wheel. You don't want to find out if the alleged victim her DNA is on the dashboard, because that is good. That's the silver bullet. I wrote an article last year. That's how long this case was going on. Last November, where I theorized that the silver bullet was going to be the blood test results like 9 months before they actually did it. But here, that is got him dead to right. But now let's get him beyond a reasonable doubt. Let's eliminate all doubt. Let's try to find out if we can have Ruggs' DNA in the driver's seat. Do we have the victim's DNA in the passenger seat? You got that in addition to the BAC, the observations by law enforcement, and the actual act, what she did. They should have him dead to right, in my opinion.
Yeah, that's why I find it odd that, at least as was reported today, that the state was the one that pushed this hearing from September 7th to October, which, I can't really make sense of it, but we'll see. We'll see. Okay, I think, we've hit that enough. Obviously, we'll keep tabs on it. Let's stay within football. Let's go to Britt Reid. People don't know the name Britt Reid. You might recognize that last name. Britt Reid is the son of Andy Reid, former member of the coaching staff with the Kansas City Chiefs. So this is now another case, Matt, that, you and I have been talking now for a couple of years, and this is a case that's been kicking around for a while. So once upon a time, the Kansas City Chiefs were in preparation for the Super Bowl. I think that's what it was, Matt. It was 2 years ago at Super Bowl, right?
Yeah, against the Bucs.
Yeah, and there was an incident. I think the week before the Super Bowl occurred, Britt Reid, his son, was alleged to have been leaving the team facility, doing some preparation for the Super Bowl, and he was alleged to have been driving about 80 miles per hour on the highway when he hit two parked cars. One had been stalled, and another car, I think, was called to try to help the stalled car from a died battery. So really tragically, and then, again, we cover everything sports law. We don't pick the stories. We just kind of have to cover them. But there was a very young girl in the car who is alleged to have suffered a traumatic brain injury and is having a, really tough time recovering. And there's some reports that she's never going to be the same again. The Kansas City Chiefs worked out some form of a settlement where they're going to be paying for, the young child's medical expenses. I'm not sure how much that's going to amount to. But Britt Reid,
it's got to be tens of millions.
Yeah, it's a ton of money. I'm not sure if it's certainly in the seven figures. Me having some, civil defense background with, TBI cases and cases of the sort, it's going to be a lot. But, at the end of the day, we're still dealing with this criminal case. So, Matt, the update, which you reported on, you were the first one that I saw on my feed that had it, but that Britt Reid was preparing to enter a guilty plea. So kind of explain what's going on, why one would enter a guilty plea, and the terms as far as you know as of today.
So what actually happened with Britt Reid's case is this case has been pending for about 18 or so months. After all the civil stuff has been worked out, the defendant enters a plea of guilty. And it doesn't seem like it's a negotiated plea, meaning that he's agreed to a sentence with the prosecution and they just need the judge to approve it. I think it's actually an open plea, which means that, all right, they're asking for this. We want something much lower. Where we have to get the judge involved because we're not agreeing to what the prosecution is recommending. If I were to guess, based on a young girl with traumatic permanent brain injuries, with DUI going as fast as they were and the BAC that he had, I think they would be asking for the statutory maximum, which I believe is 7 years in that case. And this is something I got on Twitter yesterday. People ask me, like, wait, there's a difference between jail and prison? Yes, there is. Jail is a place where individuals who usually go pending trial, or if they're convicted of misdemeanors or low-level felonies, they usually go there. In Florida, you can go to jail for up to a year on a misdemeanor, and anything over a year, you go to prison. Prison is a place where people who are convicted of felonies go, and over a year, and those tend to be obviously your drug traffickings, your armed robberies, much more violent stuff. And in the federal system, there is just only prison. So if you get convicted of a crime in the federal system, you just go to prison. There's no going to jail. But so that's the difference here. If I'm Britt Reid, I would take anything that's jail time because a judge is not going to look too favorably on this case. You severely, permanently injured a young girl. I think she's now 7 years old. I think she was 5 at the time of the incident. And she could live another 70, 80 years with those injuries. And this is somebody whose obviously father was the coach of the Philadelphia Eagles, now is the coach of the Kansas City Chiefs. So he grew up differently, a lot of people. And a lot of judges find themselves saying to these types of defendants, you're the same as everybody else here. And what you did, you got away with too much for too long. And you shouldn't have done what you did. I have a hard time thinking he dodges prison in this case. If he does, he's exceptionally lucky to only get jail time. Based on the score sheet he'd likely have in the sentence, based on the charges, and that the victims' families are all pushing for the statutory maximum, I don't see how he doesn't go to prison for this. I think it's just too egregious, and the crime was just too severe and egregious to actually dodge prison in this case.
Yeah, I mean, you would know better than I on that front. Obviously it's pretty heinous, and we talked about, Henry Ruggs, right? Resulting in the death of a 23-year-old woman with her golden retriever. And then you turn over with another tragic incident, a 7-year-old now with life debilitating injuries. So, we're talking about the criminal case. Civil case, I don't know if Reid has the amount of money to potentially cover this judgment. But just to close the civil loop here, the reason the Chiefs had to, I don't want to say had to, but the reason that they were involved in this, right? Because I think Britt Reid was alleging, right? Obviously, as a current employee and a member of the coaching staff, he was leaving work that day. So I'm not sure what went on at the facility. And I would think, right, I'm a big guy that watches, I watch Hard Knocks and all these different shows. The coaches live at the facilities. They, it's a lot of team bonding, a lot of just film study, and I imagine preparing for the Super Bowl, there was some late nights. Would it shock me, Matt, if there was alcohol at the facilities? No, it really wouldn't. So then the question comes, right? Some really messy questions, assuming that to be the case, right? Who provided the alcohol? Where did it come from? Who else was drinking? Those messy type of questions is why, there's a theory of vicarious liability, which respondeat superior, that the acts of an employee, if they're done within the scope of employment, there's some case law that says coming and going from work is within the scope of employment. I'm not sure necessarily where Reid fell in that spectrum, but we don't have to answer those questions, right? Because the Chiefs ponied up and I think to your point, paid a large sum of money. I have no idea how much it is, but I would think it's well in excess of 7 figures. So yeah, that's where we are. And we'll see. Really tragic, a lot of money being paid out and potentially a prison sentence. So just tells you, right? We can talk about Ruggs, we can talk about Reid, but one night can dramatically change the course of your life events. So I don't know, Matt, anything further to add on Reid?
Definitely with Britt Reid's case, I think you hit it right on the head of respondent superior, leaving the facility. And I wouldn't doubt there was alcohol involved in this, and he's driving home with that. And the Chiefs don't want to get into a long, contentious battle, especially civil battle where there's discovery and people are going to find out, like maybe if there was a happy hour going on and stuff like that. It's like, okay, because even if they didn't settle it and didn't do the right thing, it was good for PR and it's good as from a human standpoint. But this case had the potential, if it actually went on further, to be substantially higher. It could have easily been the 8 to 9 minimum 8 to 9 figures that this went to trial. And a potential jury heard what the facts were in this case, which I cannot imagine were good based on them settling the case as quickly as they did.
Agreed. Matt, let's go to Montrezl Harrell. So it's a case that you and I have not spoke about. It's a case that, I think people should know about, right? It's not just DUIs that come up with athletes. It's theory, right? Drug-related offenses. So if you're into criminal procedure, you're into criminal law, or you're just into basketball, right? So it's a relevant story. So Montrezl Harrell, former 6th man of the year, and he had a very good run with, the Rockets once upon a time with James Harden, Los Angeles Clippers, former, again, 6th man of the year, played for the Lakers last year. And then, was heading into free agency. Actually played for the Hornets last year, but he's becoming a free agent. We didn't know what was going to happen. So I'm going to read a part of this. And actually, I should mention one other fact. 6th man of the year is a man that has made $34 million, at least on the court during his career. So the man is not short of money, right? Some of these are kind of just too crazy to be true, right? Montrezl Harrell played his college ball at Louisville. So he's driving around in Kentucky. And the court records show that he was stopped from following, at least an allegation that he was following the vehicle in front of him too closely. So he's pulled over. He's driving a 2020 Honda Pilot. And then when they stop him, they smelled marijuana in the car. So he admits to being in possession of marijuana, and he produced a small amount from his sweatpants. But the cops are undeterred. They conduct a subsequent search of the vehicle, which the report states Harrell claims the car was rented. And they find, quote, 3 pounds of marijuana in vacuum sealed bags that was found in a backpack in the back seat. So he was charged with trafficking less than 5 pounds of marijuana. Matt, trafficking pounds of marijuana, not just what was in his sweatpants, pounds. He was charged with in the back seat. That's a felony offense. That's potentially another career altering offense. This one is a little bit of a different story than the Henry Ruggs one and the Britt Reid one. I don't know, pled to something much less than felony charges. So Matt, fill everybody in on what happened to potentially how he got the sweetheart deal of a lifetime.
So what he's looking at is felony charge for trafficking marijuana. Those could be a decade in prison, some of them, usually in the 3 to 5 year range. Some of them have minimum mandatories. But he pleads out to misdemeanor possession of marijuana, which allows him to get and one of the terms of his plea allows him to get his case expunged after a year after no issues. That's a deal you get if you are being charged with misdemeanor marijuana. not drug trafficking, not when you admitted to having marijuana on you, not when you have 3 pounds on you, when it sounds like you're the sole occupant of the vehicle, and vacuum sealed cases. They have the prosecution shouldn't have any time proving that he was doing drug trafficking. My thinking is that there was an issue with the stop. You told me about how that it was the following too closely. Remember, we're gonna, for those who taken criminal procedure, who in law school would recently get out, taking the bar exam. I know that from the experience of doing that. When to actually pull someone over, you need reasonable suspicion of a crime that is being committed. Is his tail light out? Is he speeding? All of those things are good reasons for a stop. But I think their rationale, they're worried that the whole case would get suppressed. That's the only reason you would cut this type of deal. You don't go from drug trafficking, where you could spend serious time in prison, most times with minimum mandatories, to possession of marijuana, where you get your case thrown out after a year, allowed it to get dropped. That's a sweetheart deal of all sweetheart deals. And to me, as a former prosecutor, that's the only reason you would cut some kind of deal. We would never go from drug trafficking to possession of marijuana unless we thought that the case would actually get suppressed by a judge and you'd be left with nothing.
Yeah, that's the interesting thing here. And you and I were trying to figure out, right? Was it a speed, right, with a radar, or was it following too closely, right? Or was it something that was caught on the dash cam? We don't know. But, what we do know, at least it was reported, it was 9:58 in the morning, right? He was traveling south on an I-78, and he was, allegedly stopped for following a vehicle too closely. So if you want to claim that maybe that's a precursor to stopping someone, I don't know. It's not certainly a radar controlled stop, which are very hard to fight, but as Matt, maybe a fun fact that you didn't know, I'm a veteran of the traffic courts. That was my first job out of school. I did a lot of traffic court cases up and down New York State. But following too closely, I know it's a much less serious offense than the ones that we're talking about, right? For Britt Reid, it was 80 miles an hour. For Henry Ruggs, it was 150 miles an hour. So it's not, if you were trying to peg which of these is most likely to get reduced, that's the one that's probably the most obvious one.
Yeah, because definitely the fact that following too closely, prosecution wouldn't take that into account. It's like, sometimes the bad guys just get unlucky, if it were, and we got him in this type of situation. From going from 3 pounds of marijuana, which is clearly a trafficking, clearly possession with intent to sell in Kentucky, which should have no any kind of tolerance for this actions. The only thing I could think of is that the following too closely rationale for the stop was not going to hold up with the judge. And if they didn't find that, all the admissions, all the evidence, goodbye.
I'll just add, right? So again, why the story is a little bit different. I'm not sure Britt Reid is ever going to coach again in the NFL. I feel pretty confident about that. Henry Ruggs, I feel confident. Montrezl Harrell, you're like, is this guy going to ever play in the NBA? Yes. He signed with the Philadelphia 76ers, 2 years, $5.2 million. I would tell you in the scale of who's more talented, Henry Ruggs is probably more talented than Montrezl Harrell, but it's a case that's by and large, right? It's gone. It's in the past. So yeah, and it doesn't shock me. Daryl Morey is seemingly intent on recreating the old Rockets team over with the Sixers. Now he's got Harrell, he's got James Harden, so he's got some other former Rockets that are on board. So we'll see. We'll see if Harrell returns to his former form. But that's why, again, we say innocent until proven guilty. We just put out the facts here. But if people were trying to figure out if Harrell is going to play, in the NBA again, following too closely, I mean, that's the precursor for all this. It's, as they say, kind of you knock that down, it's like a house of cards. Very different than what happened with Henry Ruggs, very different happened with Britt Reid. Matt, anything further to add on these three topics on this inaugural edition of Sports Law and Order? I like that name.
Thankfully, football season's back tomorrow, and hopefully my fantasy teams can hold up well against the very difficult competition I'll be facing this season.
Matt, thank you for coming on. Again, Matt Tympanick, the solo practitioner at Tympanick Law, which has been started since Matt has been joining these shows. You can see Matt on Law and Crime. He's all over the place. Follow him at Tympanick Law on all forms of social media. Thank you, Matt.
Thank you, Dan.
So that was Matt Tympanick of Tympanick Law. Matt has been with us for a few years. And when I first started talking to Matt, he was an associate at a law firm. He's since branched off and started his own firm, which he's doing very well. Matt's based in Florida. And, in addition to coming on with us, Matt is now like a vet of the law and crime TV show circuit. So, I'm really proud to see Matt kind of spread his wings. The long and short is that Matt was a just random lawyer on Twitter, reached out, he wanted to write for the site, and Matt has kind of used these appearances, not on our show, but on Law and Crime, to really build a really successful practice for himself. So I'm certainly happy to see Matt's practice taken off. And yeah, so just the powers of networking on social media. So I'm certainly love to see it. Just a reminder, the podcast sponsored by Themis Bar Review, a top bar prep company in the galaxy. I wanted to shout out Themis again because it is confirmed we do have another sponsor that will be joining us. I'm going to figure out a start date, an effective date, but someone that reached out to us, the partnership made sense. Tarun, I will not say the name of the sponsor that reached out to us some in the recent future that is not necessarily someone we want to be associated with, but at some point, your boy over here will get his act together and we will start doing some outreach to sponsors on our own. But for now, people want to reach out to us. We're happy to have them on the show. And then at some point, we'll figure out who's going to take over sponsorships because Tarun, I got 2 little kids at home. I can't be doing sponsorships and the podcast and being a full-time lawyer and a professor. There's a lot of hats I got to wear.
Well, I was going to say, maybe there will be a nice young law student with a marketing background that wants to join the team and be one of our full-time marketing people and help get the deals, and they could get a piece of that.
That is a very interesting proposal. I have to run it up the ladder with my fellow Dan Wallach, but maybe something could be arranged. But for now, your boy is wearing a lot of hats. Okay. Speaking of a lot of hats, Tarun, what to watch for? I think we should go to. So Tarun, a little birdie told me that your what to watch for might be that you are starting your NIL class at Minnesota Law. Is that true?
That's right. So in March, we received the final approval for this class to join the course catalog. So my mentor at my law firm will be teaching the course. I'll be helping him this semester, and then joining the faculty as an adjunct next semester, hopefully upon passing the bar. So it was very exciting. We've got 4 students in this first year, and hopefully we'll do a good job and continue to grow. But there's been great synergy with the athletic department and with the various interested parties in this field, and we're really excited. I think that this could be a launching pad for the sports law program at the University of Minnesota, which didn't exist before I started. So I'm really excited to be able to help grow it. And I've never taught before, Dan, so this is very exciting. I know you've had some experience. Do you have any advice for a first-time professor like me?
Don't use any notes. That is my advice to you. I think you got to just talk to the students. I think they can read through when you're just reading a particular lesson plan. I think you just got to speak from the heart. Tarun, you're very, very knowledgeable. You do not necessarily need notes, but I would just, conversational, I think, is key. I think, I teach a class that's an hour and 40 minutes. So as my students can tell you, I try to keep it light. I pick my spots when I can tell a joke or two, but I think conversational is certainly key. Tarun, I have, speaking of what to watch for, I have my class that we got off for Labor Day on Monday. I teach every Monday night. We're going to be covering NIL. Maybe, Tarun, if I can grab you, you can do maybe a remote guest spot for my class, which
that'd be awesome.
Certainly happy to have you do. From my what to watch for, Tarun, I'm a big sports documentary guy. And at the end of my class every week, I tell the students what I watched and what I recommend that they watch. And they're usually, more often than not, there's a legal tie-in. I watched recently, Tarun, the Untold series. I watched the Manti Te'o one, which I thought was very interesting.
I just watched that.
We discussed that, I think, on a previous show. The one that I will tell all our listeners to watch is the one on Tim Donaghy, the former NBA ref that was involved in the betting scandal, a wiretapping scandal. I'm going to let everybody make their own decisions for those that have not listened to it. I don't want to give any spoilers, but I will say there's a lot of new information in there. And there's a theory that's discussed of an NBA cover-up, that the NBA knew of more refs that were involved, objectively, a lot of other refs were involved on this wiretap, seeing calls to and from Tim Donaghy. And I don't want to make any spoilers, but is definitely ripe with some sports law issues. So yeah, the Tim Donaghy one, there's a lot of legal topics in there. I'm not sure how many more legal sports law things they're going to say. And it's Tim Donaghy documentaries on the Untold series of Netflix. I've watched every single one of those. They're all very good. The other one, people have not watched it. Go on Netflix, type in Bad Sport. Those are all very, very legal based. Cheating scandals in soccer and so on and so forth. But yeah, the Untold series and Bad Sport, if people have not found them and you are sports fans, you're fans of the content of our shows, those are both very good. Tarun, anything else to add before we put this episode in the books?
No, great to be back and hope to be back on soon. Thanks, Dan.
Yeah, Tarun, excellent job. We will sign off for Dan Wallach, myself, the entire Conduct Detrimental family. We will see you next time on another episode of Conduct Detrimental.